I used to think that the groaning intercession of the Spirit was a temporary measure, a temporary gift until we could finally have words to express. And I've come to see that that's actually not true. There are some losses that are so devastating and we're facing in our world today or in our lives and in our families that you won't ever have words to express the depth of that.
You're listening to the Forum Podcast, a production of Calvin Theological Seminary.
Cory, thanks for coming back onto the Forum Podcast. This is, I don't know which appearance you are on this podcast, but we appreciate each time that you take the time and spend an hour or so with us. Maybe less than an hour this time. But for those of you who don't know, Cory Willson, professor of Missiology, World Christianity, and what was that last one?
Public theology.
Public theology. That's a wide-ranging subject.
Mm-hmm.
And first of all, what brings you joy in your work here as this professor with a very long title?
And that is, you forgot the Jake and Betsy Tolles chair of missiology.
Okay,
can't forget Jake and Betsy Tolles. So, conversations like this gives me joy. Obviously, time with the students and in the class and outside of class. And then as well as our engagement increasingly with local congregations, both pastors, but also lay leaders in churches through the Institute of Mission, Church, and Culture. So those have been some of the recent joys. And yes, and I do enjoy writing as well. So when I have the time to engage in scholarly tasks as well, that is the engine for me.
Yeah. And you have a sabbatical coming up in the fall, is that correct?
Yeah, this fall, 2026.
Is there a particular subject you're writing or thinking about towards writing in that space?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we're bringing across the finish line our second book, me and my co-author, Matt Kamink. This one, I believe we're going to title it provisionally, it's Not in Vain, Connecting with God in Our Daily Work. So that'll be going off to the publisher this fall. So putting last touches on that, and then a couple other writing projects that I've been working on the side. Personal one, a memoir with the loss of our son Julian, and Lament. It's called Milk for Julian, Lament for my son. And then another book for pastors around being being a servant to the priesthood of all believers. So those will be in that ranking of priority of those are the three projects I'll be working on.
Nice. That sounds fantastic. I'm excited to hear and see more of that as that approaches. So along with that, with the Institute of Mission, Church, and Culture, I've experienced one of the outputs of that, or one of the fruit from that, is the Psalms retreat. I'm curious where your interest in the Psalms really originated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it originated from desperation. But it started in seminary and learning from a wonderful Old Testament scholar, John Goldingay, and about the Psalms, and then through the writing, being mentored by scholars like Ellen Davis at Duke, and Walter Brueggemann, who's recently deceased, and Eugene Peterson, around the importance of praying the Psalms. So I learned conceptually about the formative power of the Psalms for shaping our prayer life and our discipling life to Jesus. But it wasn't until a certain crisis in my life that led to, I really need to actually practice this. This isn't just a nice theoretical concept around the role that the Psalms play. I taught on them, but now I actually need to use them. And so how I describe it is that the Psalms, I wouldn't be a Christian if it weren't for Jesus. So Jesus is central, but I also have come to think that I wouldn't still be a Christian if it weren't for the Psalms. And being led in the way of Jesus to actually pray the Psalms, particularly Psalms of Lament, and bring in our pain and our anger to God. So that was and then going through that and leading a church when we were in Long Beach into an annual retreat on the Psalms, teaching on the Psalms. And then now, as of 3 years ago, with the Lilly grant we got for Thriving Congregations, offering that same retreat experience of experiential learning of the Psalms to churches all across the United States.
That's great. I think the phrase "I wouldn't still be a Christian if it weren't for the Psalms." I mean, there's so much weight in that sentence. Can you unpack a little bit, as much as or little as you want, what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, it started actually many years before I even understood the Psalms in a deep way. But going back to my freshman year of college, at a public university in California, going through a deep time of doubt, and not necessarily, I wouldn't say it was intellectual doubt. It was at a deeper level of just this overwhelming fear that what if none of this is true? And I found at the time that I talked to pastors, other people in the church, and no one could identify with that at all. And it felt so alone. And here I am, 18, 19-year-old, off in I grew up in a small town. This was like more of a medium city, but it felt like a big city to me. Mm-hmm. I was a soccer player and got cut from the team. It was a Division I team. I shouldn't have aimed so high, I guess. Shouldn't have been so ambitious. So I didn't have that security blanket. I didn't have the community around me. And so I felt very alone. So obviously the church wasn't talking about doubt and questions and even like honest doubt, like, Lord, I believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. There wasn't even that. And no one, I think, overtly shamed me, but I think people were like, oh, that's interesting, or they threw out some token phrases, maybe gave me a copy of Our Daily Bread, and that was about the extent of it. But I felt very alone, and I think at that time that was the first time Psalm 42, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Put your hope in God." And even though there wasn't very good exegesis of the psalm, that phrase really stood with me, and it was a balm. Like, okay, at least there's someone who has experienced this. Why am I buffeted with waves of doubt and depression? At the time, back in the mid-'90s, I wouldn't have called it depression, but looking back, like, oh yeah, you were, if I had to speak to that 18, 19-year-old self, say, yeah, you're in a dark place. Maybe you're feeling depressed, and that makes sense, Mm-hmm. So the Psalms were there, and so I wouldn't still be a Christian when I went for the Psalms. So, over time, learning more of like actually this, the Psalms are the prayer book for Jews and Christians for 3,000 years. You can do a lot of different things with spiritual formation around Sabbath and around fasting and Lectio Divina and public reading of Scripture. All those things are beautiful and important. But if you ask any Jew or Christian throughout history, they would say the integral part, the foundation, is the Psalms, and then other pieces on that too. And so what you find in the Psalms is like all these feelings that I had, or even feelings I didn't know I was going to yet have, or experiences of the hiddenness of God and Him feeling like He's abandoned us and hiding His face from us, or His face is bent on us towards anger. And all those are in the Psalms, and all of that, the Psalms tell us, is actually prayer. God receives those prayers as a pleasing aroma. So maybe the long way to say is like the church didn't really talk about it. You felt like you had to like clean up those parts of yourself before you could come to God, or He would be interested in hearing from me. Or certainly the church, wasn't welcoming of this. I was the only one. Still feels that way sometimes too when you're the only one. Like, talk about maybe the challenges of parenting or whatever, and everyone else is like, no, this is rosy. It's always perfect. It's always, you feel that there is a sense of like, of shame that you can experience. But then so learning to find comfort and solace and companionship with the Psalms. And I would say, and I would add to that, with Christ through the Psalms, who, in His darkest hours, asked 3 of His closest friends to join Him in prayer, and they fell asleep on him in the garden. What does he do? He cries out with the Psalms of Lament, Psalm 31. And then, on the cross, twice quoting the Psalms of Lament. And in that sense of darkness or hiddenness or feeling abandoned, why have you forsaken me, Father? The Psalms were there to pierce that loneliness. And so there is a mysterious sense. It doesn't always happen although it has happened, actually, for me in praying some of those Psalms of Lament where God's voice is heard. But even when those times aren't there, I don't hear God's voice, there still is a mysterious way in which I sense the Spirit over time mediating the presence of Christ as I pray those Psalms. So, yeah, that'll be one way of answering your question.
What's been a particular joy for you, or it doesn't have to be the top thing, just anything that comes to mind when you think about people comprehending or apprehending, because comprehending is your mind, but apprehending is embodying this idea that the Psalms are a prayer. They are, they're not just prose. It's not just poetry that's in a book. It's something that's expressed.
Yeah, there are several, stories that come to mind. One would be when I've taught on the Psalms and in Handling Correctional Facility. So with a group of men who are in for serving life sentences, and inviting them and leading them through writing their own Psalms of confession, of praise, of lament. And one student, the week after I invited them, led them through a practice of writing their own lament, engaging the Psalms, came back and said that he grew up, he never had a father. He had a mom and grandma, but never had a father figure in his life. And so when he went to write his lament, the first thing he said he needed to do was to express his anger towards God. And, for not ever giving him a father, not ever having that, and the woundedness that he felt. But he said that after I had wrestled with God, with my anger, I was able to actually receive him as Father. And that led me to a place of praise. And so that the image I think of with my boys, they're just, I've got, 3 boys, and the older 2 they're just energy. And I get home from work and my wife says, we just go wrestle them. They need to get this out. And sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's just energy in their body. And let's just take it on those times when there is anger, that ability to bring that and discharge that towards me in a constructive way. And we're wrestling and, elbowing and, friendly biting or whatever maybe, doing, laughing. That ability for them to actually get to a point where they're exhausted and they can rest and relax, they can exhale. To hear that writing, engaging the Psalms, that this man said that bringing his anger to God then led him to lament, and that led him actually into a place of praise. And in that way, praise doesn't smother his lament, and his lament didn't smother his praise, that they are all part of that transforming process. And we all want to jump to the praise. We want to jump to the end of the book of Job. My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. But none of us want to go through the process of Job, wrestling with God, bringing, his case before God. And we all think, particularly maybe because of what Jesus has done, that we all can get a bypass. And the Psalms are saying, no, you need Jesus. He's your high priest. He has accomplished everything. But our process of sanctification is going to look a lot more like Job's, with the solid hope that our anchor is in Christ. But still, you need to go through this process. You need to bring that grief. You need to bring that anger to God, wrestle with him, and there will be a praise that comes out and rings out alongside of the lament. And I think that some of those laments are going to continue to ring out from us until Christ returns and the new creation comes. And somehow in that return, those notes and those voices, those screeches of lament won't be smothered, but they will be taken up into the larger chorus of hallelujah is worthy is the Lamb who was slain. And The slain lamb has the scars of the crucifixion. And I think that image of the slain lamb with his scars, gives us a picture that our laments aren't smothered even in the new creation, although praise is the dominant theme, and evil and sin and death and all the enemies of Satan and evil are eradicated. Still, those laments aren't simply a nice, I don't know, they're just not swept away. They're somehow taken up in the larger praise and the eternal worship of the Lamb.
So in this context of, I don't know if you mentioned it in this answer, but I've heard you say this before, there's a weight-bearing hope, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly in this issue of the forum, we're looking at the past 150 years slightly, but we're also looking out. And the temptation is to say, we're looking out at the next 150 years in this hopeful way. What does it take for us as a community to look forward in a weight-bearing, hopeful way? Mm-hmm. Like what is that? I mean, if you think of our world right now, and you think of the news headlines, every day seems like another unprecedented day. And yet if you zoom out, you see the 60s and 70s also had a lot of tumultuous times. So what do we do as a faithful community to keep our faithfulness towards God, but also to look forward with hope in a real way, and not in this God's going to fix things way?
You're right, yeah, and so not engage in spiritual bypass,
yes,
or
exactly.
Yeah. So I think honestly, I think oftentimes in Christian circles, when we talk about hope, all the emphasis or majority of the emphasis is in our object of hope, meaning God and God's faithfulness. And I firmly believe that is the anchor, that is the solid foundation. But what we often don't talk about is then what does it take to be a hopeful people, or to cultivate hope, not only in us but in the next generation. And not looking at what it takes to actually to sustain the capacity to hope is actually problematic. So often I will teach in class or on retreats in different churches. Why might hope? I ask the question: why might hope be risky? And just see what people say. And there's a wonderful book by Alan Bosak called "Dare We Speak of Hope?" ? And each chapter of his book is only if. And I think that if you don't understand the fragility of hope, if you never hoped for something and had to deal with the disappointment of the loss, whether it's for a child, for a relationship, for a job, whatever it may be, to go through that process of, like, for example, graduates coming out of school, putting out hundreds of job applications and getting no response back. Okay, yes, your object of hope is God, but that strength to then write another resume, to imagine yourself, the energy it takes to imagine yourself in that position, to articulate that letter of interest, imagining yourself in that position, it's exhausting. And I think we need to do a lot more while we continue to hold, you're asking us a long way to get it to your answer, to answer your question, but when we look at, like, our object of hope, yes, it's a sure foundation, but what does it take to cultivate the capacity for hope when we live on this side of the resurrection of the and of the coming creation, or a new creation? And one of those big pieces is to engage in weight-bearing hope. Means that you have to run through the process of lamenting. You can't sustain a life of hope if you don't learn how to lament. And if you think you can, then that's optimism or you just happen to live a comfortable life in a comfortable community. But anybody who's experienced deep hardship or been in communities where things are not comfortable, things are desperate, you have to learn how to bring your worry, your cares, your concerns, your disappointments, your losses to speech somewhere, and preferably to God. And so the great passage of Romans 8, for example, that we tend to jump to the end of Romans 8, that God will work all things for good. But we bypass the process that starts with suffering. And Paul says all creation is groaning and lamenting and crying out, longing for the resurrection, the redemption of our bodies, and of renewal of all things. And then Paul says it's not only we are groaning, but the Holy Spirit, who the Father has poured into our hearts, is also groaning. So you have this picture of a whole community of creation, of God, and then we ourselves then are led to groan. So the same Spirit that God has poured into our hearts, by which we have intimacy, Abba, Father, is the same Spirit that leads us to groan because we don't know how to pray. As we are stuck in between this is the fallen world, sin, death, the devil, the grave continues to swallow up anybody randomly. The Spirit is actually the one who intercedes. And what does the Spirit intercede with? Everything's going to be okay? Put a smile on your face? Not with groaning, because that groan is the actual experience of intimacy. You will never know. I mean, I used to think that the groaning intercession of the Spirit was a temporary measure, a temporary gift until we could finally have words to express. And I've come to see that that's actually not true. There are some losses that are so devastating and we're facing in our world today, or in our lives and in our families, that you won't ever have words to express the depth of that, of the pain, of the hardship, of the loss, of the anguish. And it is it's a gift of God that He gives us, that groaning spirit. And this is where the Psalms of Lament come in. Like the Psalms of Lament attune us to the groaning of the Spirit in creation, in ourselves, and in the world. So, and then that leads to hope. Yes, God will, the end of the story, end of human history is sure. Christ will return. Sin, Satan, and death will be eradicated. But we can't hold on to that hope apart from the Spirit working through us and us engaging in the process of groaning, of lamenting, of bringing out, in the Maranatha cry, how long, O Lord, come Lord Jesus. So that'll be one way to talk about weight-bearing hope, that at least that from Romans 8, how that fits with the Psalms of Lament.
So how do we talk about that as the Calvin Seminary community, but also broader, a wider Calvin Seminary community? What is it that we need to engage in as a community?
Well, I think first is that the church is never called to be a community for itself, right? We are called to be, we're blessed to be a blessing, that God's love for the world, the entire world, has led Him to create this thing called the church as a community, to be an ambassador, to be mediators, to be a priestly presence in this world that He loves. And that means facilitating, both mediating God's love and character and concern towards creation and humanity, but also turning around and lifting up creation and humanity's praise and laments back to God. So I think the first thing is not seeing ourselves like the world is also in pain, and we can't lose that, how much pain that we're in a denomination or transition, the pains that we are experiencing during transitions in the denomination or in the seminary, the uncertainty, the changing times that we're living in, that we need to anchor that in we're a part of a world that is also feeling that. I think that so that would be one piece. I think the other would be there are many gifts that our community has, and that the world needs, that the broader church outside of the Christian Reformed or Reformed communities need. But one of them that is probably not one of our strengths is actually lament. Even though John Calvin, he believed that the only songs you were supposed to sing in church were actually psalms, and you were to sing them a cappella. So you have that, and he also in his preface to the Psalms talked about you won't really know the power, the transforming edification that the Psalms provide, except for having first prayed them or sung them in community. So you put those pieces together, like we don't really practice lament well in most of our churches. We think that if we are to lament, then we will just stick in the negativity or live in the past only. And the Psalms don't lead you in this book of Psalms. Lament is not a destination. But it is an integral part of the journey. You can't get to a place of weight-bearing hope if you don't traverse through lament. And so I think that one of the things that we need to do as a church and as a seminary is to actually name those things, have spaces where individually and as a community we're able to name the losses, the fears, the laments, and to entrust those into God's hands. Because you can't, we all carry those with us. So are you going to be honest with God about those and others, or are you going to stuff them and hide them? And I would think that our ability to be a hopeful people and to live in a healthy and whole way would require us to actually engage in more practices of lament as we live into the future. Mm-hmm. And ironically, when you do that, so I'll make it concrete. So when we lost our third son, Julian, and then a few months later, we're pregnant with our fourth son, Wesley, it was really surreal, and it felt like our hearts were just being stretched. And like, how can I hold both this deep, deep anguish that waking up in the morning to either my bed being shaken by my wife crying or me waking my wife because I'm crying, like you wake from a sleep crying. I've never had that before. And at the same time, this growing hope of our fourth son and the fear or worry about his life. And our hope and prayer was, God, as we engage in remembering Julian and observing this year of mourning. So as the rabbis say, mourning lasts a year, but grief lasts a lifetime. Mm-hmm. So there are mourning practices that we observed for Julian. Our hope was that as we did that, as we engaged in grieving the loss of Julian, that would actually give us more capacity to receive the gift of Wesley. And we found that has been true. And we're able to more, particularly as we got closer to the due date, to give more of our heart over to risk celebrating and entering into the joy of Wesley. So I think if we take that as a concrete metaphor of going into the future, that I just don't agree with those who want to shut down lament or think it's a way of living in the past. If anything, that's what allowed us to be hopeful and live into the future. Mm-hmm. So, concretely, there are at least 4 faculty members that I have, spent 11 years with here, and they are no longer here in the seminary. And that's a lament. That's a grief that I need to and have been processing and bringing before God. I think, broader with, the denomination, I think that there are a lot of griefs, and as grateful and as committed as I am to this Christian Reformed Church and Calvin Seminary, there are people who walked with us and who are deep friends who are no longer a part of the church. And that's something that feels like a bit of like a divorce, and just to not acknowledge that many people are feeling. Sometimes it's families that are ripped apart, certainly congregations. So I think there's just a need for us to be able to name that and to lament that, and upholding the differences and not changing maybe our views or stance on theology or our ethics. But I think that's an important piece.
So without doing it prematurely, how do you turn that corner from that lament to hopeful anticipation for our seminary community and for our denomination?
Yeah. Well, I with grief work, with and the cultivation of weight-bearing hope, it's not procedural. Like, it's not like I can't take 3, give you some prescription of take 3 of these pills, try this new, whatever drug or exercise routine, and it'll get there. But I think that, I think I would lean into the Psalms and the breadth of the Psalms. It's not just the lament. The Psalms represent a whole range of the human soul, as Calvin would say. And individually and corporately, that'll be one step, and that we need to be stretched. I think that what you find is when you're committed to, it's more of like when we with, again, to go back to our loss with Julian, I remember my wife asking me when we were in the car before we went into the hospital to deliver Julian's body, she asked, what do you hear from God? And I said, I don't hear anything from him. But I said, I do get this deep sense that we're being invited to stand in and on the deepest truths, the truest truths that we know, and to actually put down our roots deeper. And I asked her, Monica, what do you hear from God? And she said, I hear God saying, I know. And I said, hold on to that, because I've heard that those 2 words before. And I'll take as a grace that God is speaking to you and through you to me. And I guess what I would say is that standing in those 2 things, God saying, I know, I'm present, I see, and standing on the truest truths and putting down deeper roots, I would say that maybe not every week, but every few months looking back, we found ourselves always, like our grief and lament over Julian is what ties us to the, Easter's coming up, and that's why Easter matters. Like, it ties us to our son and to that future, the end of human history, of standing with him and embracing him and the new creation. But we aren't living in the past. We do our other 3 sons no service by living only in the pain over the loss of Julian. And what we have found over time, and again, we're only a little over a year into this process, is that we do find that the memory and remembering the grieving of Julian actually is life-giving. It actually frees us up to be more present in the moment, to be more hopeful in the lives of our 3 boys. And that would be my hope for our community, for our denomination, and for our seminaries, that if we go through this process, that actually we are not stuck in the past, and we don't repeat the past, and we honor the human image-bearing brothers and sisters who are no longer part of are formally a part of our community. But also we're open to the new gifts that God is bringing into the seminary, the new staff, the new faculty, the new students, and then as a denomination, we are able to receive the gifts of all those who are coming into the denomination. You know, think of the growth amongst the Spanish-speaking churches. You know, the other. If you look at the church planting efforts of Tim Sheridan and Resonate, that there is a lot of bright spots of people who are coming into the Christian Reformed Church and finding resources and life and gifts, and we need to have space in us to be able to receive those gifts, and that's my hope and my prayer.
Wonderful. Yeah, Cory, thank you again for so much bringing so much of your person to this space, and for your time today. We appreciate your gifts here, and look forward to seeing the work that comes out of your next sabbatical. And that's been long-standing, I know. It's not just coming out immediately, but we just appreciate you being here and being a part of this community.
Thank you, Phillip. It's always a joy. And your gifts and your person is a gift to this community. And thanks to Jonah behind the booth.